I may definitely sound arrogant, but from my mid teenage, I naturally started to lean more towards logical thinking. Not because I was highly intelligent or I was born that way. And no, I'm not saying that I was perfect. I didn't make mistakes. I made mistakes too. Everyone does. But I was pretty logical. And that was probably due to my upbringing and the environments I grew up in. So because of that, I started to notice something strange. I saw that most people are just stuck in problems that aren't really that serious. One change and it will disappear. But they kept looping on the same problems again and again. The problem with problems is that we realize it after creating it. We keep trying harder to fix the problem and nothing happens. But recurring problems have a clue that one time problems don't. Repetition signals that something beneath the visible outcome remains unchanged. If you keep arriving at the same destination, chances are you're walking the same path. The weakness of the human mind is that it naturally highlights events. We notice the anxiety, not what produced it. We remember the argument, but not what led to that argument. Outcomes feel vivid while causes remain invisible. And that's exactly why problems repeat. Because recurring problems are not random outcomes, they have a pattern. So I've distilled systems into six principles. This is not just another framework you casually watch. This explains why outcomes repeat, why emotions emerge, how outcomes behave, and most importantly, how to solve real life problems. This is an in depth episode on systems thinking, not as an academic subject, but as a practical toolkit. And I'm pretty confident that it will change the way you see your life. Principle 1. Outcomes are systemic. Every system is perfectly designed to produce the results it currently produces. Every outcome is the result of a system. It's kind of like a tree. A tree is not separate from its roots. In the same way, outcomes are not separate from the causes. If you consistently sleep late, you have designed a perfect routine to sleep late. That's your system. And that system is designed by you intentionally or unintentionally. Systems don't care about intention. Every system simply leads to an outcome that's more probable. If you sleep late, you'll probably wake up late. If you scroll for 3 hours, you will probably feel numb. If you don't have a goal that serves as your anchor, you'll probably feel lost. There's no surprise. The result is just the tip of the iceberg. But our perception is naturally event oriented, not process oriented. We experience moments or outcomes, not processes. We experience the loss, not the incentives, the decisions that led to that loss. We experience low energy, not sleep deprivation. Outcomes dominate our attention because they are immediately visible, unexpected, and emotional, whereas the cause, which is the cement and brick of any outcome, often remains distributed across time. One specific cause rarely leads to a major outcome. Outcomes are mostly a result of many interacting variables, but we don't see this chain. We just notice this happened to me. But what appears sudden is often the first moment we become aware of a process that was unfolding all along. We just see the biggest domino fall down, not the previous smaller ones that generated enough force to move the biggest one. Even emotions are not random. We feel like emotions emerge out of nowhere, but they do have deeper foundation. A person who sleeps 4 hours each day, who overthinks everything, isolates themselves for weeks, and lives with this constant fear of uncertainty, should not be surprised by anxiety. A person consuming hyperstimulating empty foods, who uses social media for 4 hours each day, and who has an unorganized routine, should not be surprised when they feel lost. Emotions are not random events, they are visible outputs of invisible conditions. Every outcome is systemic, and when you see outcomes as signals, you stop reacting emotionally to everything that happens. Because most people treat outcomes as problems or solutions, but outcomes, problems, and of course solutions are information. Anxiety is an information, distraction is an information, failure is an information, success is an information. The shift from outcome based thinking to information based thinking is the real breakthrough because systems don't produce outcomes randomly, they produce outcomes in patterns. Principle 2. Outcomes have patterns. So, there are mainly three systemic patterns. linear, spiral, and exponential. Once you see these patterns, you'll observe that seemingly unrelated things operate on the same structural principle. Or, in simple words, they have a recurring pattern, or they have a recognizable pattern. Whether it's business, habits, relationships, civilizations, economy, or even a biological system, it applies to literally everything. So the first systemic pattern is linear. 1 equals 1, 2 equals 2, 10 equals 10. Inputs are equal to outputs. Of course, it applies to things like production, area, volume, or distance, but it just applies to simple environments, not the complex ones. But most of us have been trained to think linear. We have been trained by our education system to think linear because that's easier to teach, test, and standardize. And because we spend most of our childhood and early adulthood in schooling and universities, we just become very good at linear thinking. In fact, if you notice, that's the exact foundation of the current hustle culture. More time is equal to more result, more effort is equal to more marks. And that sounds pretty logical because that's exactly what we have been learning from the age of 4. As a result, most of us leave school with a terrific knowledge of isolated subject and a terrible ability to solve real world problems. Because much of reality is not linear. Now, the second systemic pattern is the spirals or loops, and these are actually interesting. Confidence trigger action, action leads to improvement, improvement reinforces confidence. Social anxiety triggers avoidance, avoidance compounds social anxiety. Loneliness triggers withdrawal, withdrawal amplifies loneliness. Most recurring problems are loops, not linear events. And the third pattern is exponential. These are the most surprising ones. To get this point across, there's a quote by Bill Gates. Most people overestimate what they can do in 1 year and underestimate what they can do in 10 years because skills, habits, and results all compound. And the thing is, both linear pattern and spirals can compound. So ultimately, most things compound. Most things have exponential growth or exponential downfall. Someone learning a skill for 1 week appears unchanged, but as years of inputs go in, the skill becomes mastery. A cancer cell is invisible for years and then suddenly breaks out with a tumor. Exponential systems hide their momentum during the early stages. That's why most transformative systems look unimpressive at the beginning and unbelievable when it takes off. Once you can identify the problem, you gain insight of the future behavior of any system. You basically unlock prediction to a level, and that's why it's crucial to understand these patterns. Linear systems reward consistency, spiral systems reward understanding, exponential systems reward patience. Principle 3: the order disorder asymmetry. One of the foundations I talk about in most of my episodes is disorder. Disorder is statistically easier than order because there are simply more ways for things to fall apart than to stay organized. Like, for example, this Rubik's Cube. This has countless ways you can scramble it, but you can just solve it by few methods. Like a room can stay organized just by a few possible combinations, but it can be disorganized by literally countless pathways. The same applies to the body, to the mind, to business, to relationships, to productivity, to societies. Order requires intentional coordination. Disorder just waits for a failure of coordination. Another thing that frustrates a lot of people is that their efforts seem to do nothing. They're stuck in the same plans, same routines, same draining relationships, same life. And the more they try to hold the pieces together, the more it falls apart. Because we assume inputs should be equal to outputs. Linear thinking creeps in. But the reality is, no system converts inputs to outputs with perfect efficiency. The pitfall is that we create plans and build expectations as if the world operates on 100% efficiency. They look like schedules where every minute is optimized. Productivity plans assuming uninterrupted focus. Business projections assuming ideal execution. The problem is not that reality breaks your plans. The problem is that your plans assume a beautiful reality. A business that can operate only under ideal conditions is weak. A relationship that can survive only in perfect conditions is weak. A routine that cannot tolerate uncertainty is weak. Strong systems are not designed around perfect performance. They are designed around expected imperfection. And because inputs and outputs are really symmetrical, it becomes even more complex. Inputs can produce delayed outputs, accelerated outputs, diminishing outputs, or sudden outputs. More effort does not always mean more output. A student may study for months and experience no visible improvement, and then suddenly experience rapid growth in understanding. A relationship may slowly weaken due to resentment, due to unspoken expectation, or a mismatch in values, and then suddenly collapse from what appears to be a small argument. The input output relation is so asymmetrical that sometimes even massive inputs can produce very little outputs. Someone can work extremely hard, but on the wrong thing, with the wrong approach, in a poorly designed structure. More hours do not always produce more value. More information does not always produce more understanding. More effort does not always solve structural problems. Sometimes the bottleneck is not intensity, but architecture. And good planners understand this. Engineers account for labor inefficiency. Investors account for risk. Athletes account for recovery. Systems that survive often account for buffers, margins, inefficiency, adaptability, and randomness of reality. So the actionable insight is to plan according to efficiency loss, because perfect plans appear perfect only on paper. Strong systems are not maximally optimized. They are built with room for reality to go wrong. Principle 4. Levels of problem. Most people suffer twice, once from the problem and once from misdiagnosing the problem. Problems have three levels: self, structure, and society. This categorization is important because most people just go to extremes. Either they drop into victim mentality, like I'm undisciplined, I can't focus, or they blame society. They blame external things for everything. Like phones are the problem, like education system is bad. But problems do not arise from a single level. Sometimes the problem can be from the self. Sometimes the problem can be with a structure. Sometimes the problem can be bigger than the self. The problem can be societal. So understanding which problem exists where is more important than just blind blaming everything. The first level is the self. These are systems within you, like your habits, values, beliefs, biases, your identity, your routines, attention span, decision making, emotional regulation. Of course, they matter. A person who lives terrible routines, who neglects health, who has no direction in life, and you know, who cannot regulate his emotions will fail no matter the external conditions. Accountability is important, but when the problem is genuinely with the self, most times most people over-personalize the problems. Not every problem originates from the self. Sometimes the problem is structural. These include environments, incentives, algorithms, workflows, relationship dynamics, or organizational structure. Many good relationships fail not because one person is evil, but because the structure itself is incompatible, like misalignment in values or anything like that. Two genuinely good people can still be incompatible, but if either of the two blames themselves or each other for structural problems, they create unnecessary sufferings, and the problem keeps repeating. Structural problems are better solved with change and structure, not emotions. Then the third level is society. These are systems operating at much larger scale than one person or one structure. These include economics, education system, political systems, media ecosystems, cultural norms, technological infrastructures. Like anxiety can sometimes be a result of a societal condition that we have created, like extreme comparison or overstimulation. And by no means these three levels assumed we don't need responsibility. Systems thinking is not about removing agency, it's about locating causes accurately. Kind of like a doctor locates the problem. Problems can originate from the self, from the structure, or from the society. And jumping to self blame or to external blame for everything is like a doctor operating lever when the problem is in the heart. So, self, structure, society. These are the three levels of problems. And sometimes the problem can be an interaction between all of these. Incorrect diagnosis creates unnecessary suffering. A falling relationship may not need more love, but better communication patterns. An exhausted person may not need more ambition or more hustle, but better recovery and sustainable workflows. These levels are not isolated boxes. I've just kept them in the box so it's easier to understand and categorize. They are mostly interconnected. We live inside nested layers of systems continuously shaping thought, emotion, behavior, and possibility. You cannot solve a problem correctly if you misunderstand the level generating it. Actionable insight. Ask, at what level does this problem exist? Principle 5, Constraints and Leverage. Imagine a business which has a great product but zero distribution, and that business keeps on improving their products over and over, just hoping that people will come to buy it. Sounds stupid, right? Because the constraint isn't product quality, it's distribution. Most people optimize what isn't limiting them. Most people try to wake up early without sleeping early. Most people try to focus without subtracting distractions. Most people try to eat healthy while still putting loads of chips in their cart when they go to mart. You don't need to eat healthy. That's the goal. You just need to stop bringing unhealthy food items into your home. That's the process. That's your input. That's the change you make. You don't need to wake up early. That's the goal. You just need to stop using your phone by 9 and sleep by 10. That's the change you make. That's your input. Sounds obvious, but if you're stuck, you're probably focusing on the goal itself. I'm not saying that goals are unimportant or anything like that. Goals are absolutely important. That gives you a target. But target is not equal to process. A process is the roadmap, input, or system to achieve your goal. Every process has constraints. Constraints can be first systemic, that is the limitation of a system or condition, and second, personal, limitation of the self. Like what you're watching right now is being shot on a low budget phone. The lighting is done by a lamp, and it's just a simple setup I could build without asking money from my parents. So if I expect professional level colors, details, and lighting from this setup, it will probably not happen. That's a systemic constraint. But what I can expect is better ideas, better articulation, consistency. And if I'm not able to work on that, that is my personal constraint. If the constraint is in the system or condition, change or adapt to the system. If the constraint is you yourself, that is, the constraint is personal, develop the capacity. Or simpler, if the bottleneck is outside you, change the structure. If the bottleneck is inside you, change yourself. And if you can't do both, then accept it, because suffering mostly comes from trying to change what must be accepted and accepting what must be changed. The most valuable effort is not always the most dramatic, but is often the one applied precisely where it's needed. And this is boring, because the human mind always seeks to add things. It wants something dramatic, it wants that spike of novelty. And sometimes you genuinely need to add things, but most times you just need to subtract the obstacles. Focus is subtraction of distraction. Clarity is subtraction of confusion. Subtraction is boring because it doesn't give the dopamine hit of addition. Trying a new focus technique is exciting, but removing distraction, boring. Making more and more and more friends feel exciting, but maintaining a small, meaningful, curated group you actually respect, that's boring. And this actually connects to the third principle. Order requires maintenance. Every addition requires maintenance. Every habit requires upkeep. Every commitment requires attention. Every project consumes resources. Addition needs maintenance. Every addition increases maintenance costs. Sometimes just simplifying helps more than adding. The leverage is not in speed, it's in removal of what slows you. The simplest way to move forward is removing what holds you back. Principle 6, The Systemic Inversion. The beautiful and the terrible part of any system is that at first we build systems and then those systems build us. Every habit is a system, whether it's good or bad. Productivity, routines, unproductivity, lack of focus, overthinking, impulsive behavior, all are systemic outcomes. Just ask someone who sleeps at 2 a.m. Why do you sleep so late? Why can't you sleep early? That's good for your health. You'll hear things like, I can focus better at night. That's not my type. That's not my chronotype. That's the new term they use. No matter if you list 10 health benefits of sleeping early, they will still be biased towards their side. And they know the consequences of what they are doing. In fact, they are experiencing it. But they are still biased towards that routine because that feels familiar. Because that routine is such a large part of their identity, of their sense of self, that stopping it or sacrificing it feels like a loss. It literally feels like self loss. A person starts using social media. It slowly becomes part of their identity. Now, quitting it feels like an identity threat. The opposite is true as well. Once a good habit becomes a part of the identity, not doing it feels like self loss. I personally experienced this once training became part of my identity. On days when I miss training, I feel like something major is missing from my day. That one miss won't make any major difference in my health, but the pain of training feels better than the pain of missing. That's how the identity solidifies. A writer doesn't force themselves to write. A reader doesn't force themselves to read. A social media addict doesn't force themselves to keep using it. A behavior becomes self definition as it repeats, and this self definition begins a loop. A distracting routine will produce a distracted mind. A distracted mind will produce a distracting routine. A disciplined routine will produce a clear mind. A clear mind will produce a disciplined routine. The easiest part is to stay the same. The hardest part is to change the self. And this isn't just an individual experience, it's happening at larger scales. Repeated incentives become culture. Cultures begin reproducing those incentives automatically. Repeated behavior becomes normal. Normalized behavior repeats. So after a point, it becomes self reinforcing, and the self reinforcing cycle creates drastic outcomes. The systems you adopt today become the architecture of your future self. Every repeated behavior casts a vote for the person you become. Every repeated structure produces long term consequences, whether intentional or not. If you don't intentionally design your life, normalized systems will design it for you. Algorithms will shape desires. Environments will shape habits. Incentives will shape behavior. Social norms will shape priorities. Systems don't stop working simply because you don't notice them. Because the systems you live in eventually becomes the systems that build you. So, a quick recap. Principle 1. Every outcome is systemic, from internal emotional states to reactions to problems to solutions. Takeaway. Look at the conditions generating the outcome, not just the outcome. Principle 2. Outcomes have patterns. Systems mostly operate through linear patterns, loops, and exponentials. Takeaway. Most recurring problems are loops. Most drastic outcomes are exponentials. Principle 3. Disorder is more probable than order. Strong systems are not built for perfect conditions. They are built for expected imperfection. Takeaway. Don't make a rigid plan. Build an adaptive roadmap. Principle 4. Levels of problems. Problems can originate from the self, the structure, the society, or from a combination of all. Takeaway. Diagnose the level of problem. Most people suffer because they diagnose problems at the wrong level. Principle 5. Systems have constraints and leverage. Constraints are limitations, personal or systemic. Leverage is to change what's needed. Takeaway. The highest leverage often comes from removing friction and bottlenecks. Principle 6. Systems build you. The systems you live in build your self concept. Takeaway. If you don't intentionally design your life, normalized systems will do it for you. So, congratulations. Now you can solve problems better than most people. And I'm not exaggerating this, because once this settles into your memory, you stop reacting emotionally to every problem that you face. You trace outcomes back to the structures generating them. Systems thinking is less about controlling life and more about seeing clearly. The next step is to apply this into real life. So, I have come up with a simple idea: trace, plan, execute, adapt. This applies to almost every problem. First step is to trace back the problem to its cause. Because most times the most obvious solutions do not work. The simplest solutions do. Sometimes you don't need more focus, you need more sleep. A falling relationship may not be bad luck, but accumulated resentment, emotional asymmetry, and incompatibility. Next job is to build a realistic plan to solve the cause, not the problem. Good systems make desired behavior easier. Bad systems make destructive behavior easier. Third step, execute the plan. This is where the drop happens. People plan nicely, and then after 1 week of no progress, they just abandon it. But every system requires time to create outputs or to create results. Even bad habits aren't sudden. They form over time, they form with repetition. And just quitting after seeing no progress for 1 week, 1 month, that's like a farmer planting a seed today and just digging it tomorrow to see whether it has grown roots or not. This is why consistency matters more than emotional intensity. Not because consistency sounds motivational or that's trending, but because consistency is where systems get time to create results to become exponential. The fourth and final, stay open to adapting. Reality never behaves exactly like the plan. There will always be friction, unexpected variables, efficiency loss, randomness, and human limitations. If the system is unrealistic, make it realistic. If the constraint is personal, expand your skill set. If the process exhausts, reduce overload. Just stay open to adapting. Because without it, you are just planning a beautiful fantasy. Trace, plan, execute, adapt. That's systems thinking in a nutshell. And if you remember nothing from this episode, just remember this. Problems are not problems. Solutions are not solutions. Reactions aren't just reactions. Emotions aren't just inner states. They're systemic outcomes. I believe this episode was a valuable piece. It takes me enormous amount of time and effort to synthesize and produce each of these episodes, and that too with limited resources. So if you find that effort and the content valuable, consider subscribing and commenting your deepest realization you got from this episode. Rahul, signing off.